We'll get into the lecture slides. And so first, is there any questions regarding the coursework that is due next week? Yeah?
So on the module handbook, you said everything that can be done with Vue should be done with Vue.
Yeah.
I'm kind of confused how that works with templates, because everything can be done, everything can be made into a template, right? But we shouldn't make everything into a template.
Okay, yeah. So when you say template, do you mean the entire interface into one template, or that's not required? That's not necessary. But so long as you can use a template in some places, and that'll be enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, and next week you can still email me if you really need help. You can also actually email me to arrange a meeting, and we can have a same hands-on discussion. And let me do one more thing. I'll make the mouse slightly bigger so it'll be easier to see. Cursor size. Okay, and so just as usual, so today we have probably more than enough to cover. So if you look at the module page, and we actually have 3 lectures to cover. One about the conditional, which is a VF, and the second one is events. So it's basically how do you do event handler, so like on, etc. And the last one is the forms. So how do you get user input from different, say, HTML forms? So I think for most of these sections, we're going to have some examples about how you can use those in your coursework as well. So because there's too much content, I might have to skip certain of the details and focus on the part which is most relevant for the coursework. Okay, that's why you will see sometimes I'm going to skip certain things fairly quickly. So let's start with the first part, which is about conditional rendering, and we've seen this before. Can't remember how many times we actually used it, but the Vue directive to use here is Viewif. And then, so this is the way how to use it. You use VF and equal to certain properties, and this should be a variable in your Vue instance. And the values of this variable and will decide whether this h1 get displayed or not. So in this case, if awesome is evaluated to true, that means, for example, it's a string or it's a number not 0, bigger than 0, or just a Boolean value become true, then this h1 will be displayed, and otherwise it will not be. And also, the next one, which related to this, is the VElse. So just like normal if else. So that means if this one, the first line, is false, so awesome is false, then the second one will be show, and that's what the else object. And if the first one is true, then the second one will not show. So I prepared the example. So this time I didn't try to do live coding because I find that's too time consuming. Instead of I wrote some code so it'll be faster. So if you can see in the code, did I do? Okay. Okay, I didn't even do the first. Okay, I did the first one. Okay, so I defined a div element with the ID equal to app1, and later on you can see this is where this part is the Vue code, and where it will change the values of those. So currently it says, if you look at this line of code, so basically what's this heading, h1 heading will display depends on the value of the awesome. And as you can see here, currently awesome value is set to true, So if we run this and make this bigger, I have to manually zoom in. And let's turn on the developer tools. I'll put it to the side. And then make the developer tools a bit bigger. Oh, this works on this side. So if you remember, in the code, this Vue instance is called Vue1, and you can check the value of the awesome in command line just by typing Vue1.awesome. It's actually recognized, and you can see its content value is true. So when it's true, this heading will be displayed. Vue is awesome. So that's why we have this heading here. Obviously, if you look at the code now, you will not see anything in the view. If you go to the element part, it only shows the rendered part. And so you can easily change the value of the awesome in the console. So if I say equal to false, okay, then what will happen is we'll change that value for that variable, but also change the text here as well. And so you can see now, and that becomes false. So Vue is awesome get disappeared because the code here. So because this is false, so this h1 is disappeared. So instead of this, Vue else now is displayed. So that's why it's now shows as oh no. Yeah. And so if we change back, and then it's changed back here as well. Okay, let's get back to the slides. So that's Viewif and Viewelse. This is a bit too big now. Okay, so what essentially saying here is, in the last examples, we can use Viewif to control one element, which is h1. And in some cases, you might want to control more than one element. And in this case, for example, you want to decide whether title, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, all these three elements get displayed or not using one Viewif. And in that, you have to put that into something. For example, you can put that inside a template. Oops. That's a view thing, but it actually does not display anything. And here it's just used as a container or parent element to control all these three elements. So the changes of this OK value would control the all three elements here, whether they get displayed or not. So if we go, yeah, so I did it here as well. So if we look at this part of the code, I have using one Viewif to control the display of these h1 and two p1s. So currently the OK value is true, so those are going to be displayed. And if we go into the code, you can see we have title and paragraph 1, paragraph 2. Okay, and if we change the value here, just as we did before, view1.ok, and currently it's true, you can see below. And if I change that to false, and then as you would expect, the title and paragraph 1, paragraph 2 should disappear. Yeah, so those disappears. So you can control more than one element using one Viewif. Okay, so we've seen this before, Viewelse. So basically just like if else in any language. And then you have to put it right after the Viewif statement. And so you have Viewif here. Basically, it works with the last Viewif, and if you have something in between, another Viewif, then this Velse will not work with this first Viewif, but the other one appear after that. Okay, and just to kind of matching any programming language, so you had if, else, and you can have else if as well. So this is what V else if is are. So the way it works is exactly as you would have, say, in Java or JavaScript. It just says if the first condition is not true, then you decide if the second condition is true. If it's true, then we'll do something which is here is B, and if not, and then keep going until it's finished. So you can see, I think this one can be even smaller. Okay, if we see the code in Visual Studio Code, we have the same thing here. Okay, and these conditions really depends on the type is equal to A, B, or C. So you can see first, start with the type is empty. So none of these conditions will meet. So this one will not meet, or this one will not be true. This will not be true either. So in the end, it will do this else, which says not A, B, or C. And as you change the value of type, and either A, B, or C will get displayed on the page. So let's get here. So currently you see that's not A, B, or C get displayed, and because the value of what is called type is empty, and if we make it into A, okay, you can see it still displays not A, B, or C, and because JavaScript is case sensitive, so small a is still not capital A or capital B or C. And so if you do now capital A, and you can hear it's changed to A, and similarly you can do B, changes again, and then C, and here changes again. Okay, so this is what the else if. This is how the else if works. Okay, and so how can we use this in the first coursework? And so the examples I give here is in the top of the page, let's say you have some buttons or the links, and that allows the user to either sign in or sign up. And these things should change depends on the status. Say, for example, if the user not logged in yet, then you should have either sign up or sign in button, so user can click one of these. But once user is signed in, then those should be hidden. Instead, you should have, say, sign out link available on the top. So this kind of toggling, you can use Viewif. Okay, so here, the top part, I'm defining a new view. I'm doing, okay, let me try if I can use this one. I'm defining a new view component called myHeader. Okay, and it has a props called signed in. So what that means is you'll be able to take in one parameter, which is a variable. And in the template, it's a div with 3 links to 3 different pages, and it could be different things. It doesn't have to be like this. And the important part is VF. Okay, you can see the conditions is if it's not signed in, which is for these two, and those 2 links were shown up, which is the sign up and sign in. So essentially, if user is not signed in, you show these 2, and when user is signed in, you will show sign out button. So essentially depends on the value of signed in, and either sign up, sign in show or sign out, but not all three will be shown at the same time. Does that make sense? And then actual Vue instance itself is quite straightforward. And here I only defined one variable called signed in. Its initial value is probably better to set as false, which is true here, but it doesn't matter. And which is this value is something you can manipulate, use your Vue or JavaScript code, you can change it. And then the links on the top of your page, which is in the header, will update automatically. There's nothing else you need to do once this is set up. How do I get rid of the pens? I want to scroll down. Yeah. Ah, still there. Okay. And the last few lines is really just say adding the Vue component to your page. So you defined your component called myHeader, and in your HTML file, actually when you need to add the header, you just say add header. So anyone remembers what this vbind sign in equal to sign in does? Why do we need that one? Why do we need this part? Or what does it do? No. Okay, so we have two different signing here. The first one, vbind signing, is binding. How do I get? How do I turn this thing off? Toggle. Let me try some of this. Okay. And so we have two signing here. And the first vbind signing is this signing here. So it says, because this component has properties or the prop. So it says, I want to bind this props of the component to the signing of the Vue instance. That's what it needs. So that's where it connected. So that's after that, then when this signing value changes, and this signing in here will change, right? So that's why you use that. This is how you give, say, values to the props of a component. Okay, let me see. Yeah, just because time, I'm not gonna show you the actual code, but I think conceptually that should be easy enough to work with. Okay, yeah. And so this is a second example that you might be able to use in the coursework. Maybe make it slightly smaller still. Yeah, almost in one line. So what they're trying to do is say, if your app has a few links at the top, say 3, 4, 5 links, and depend each for one separate pages, and then depends on which page you are on, you might want to display the link for that page slightly differently. For example, if I'm on home page, maybe the home page link in my header should be, say, shown in bold or different color or disabled completely. And when you change to, say, the shopping cart page, then the shopping cart link should be changed somehow differently. So to do that, I defined a separate component called top links, and it takes one parameter, one prop called page. So it needs to know which page currently the user is on. It doesn't detect it automatically. It expects some other code to tell us that. Okay, and then you have the actual links. So I put in 3 there, but you can have more than these, and you can add as many as you want. And each of them is a link, and it will link to different pages, depends on the actual link. So the home links to the home page, the cart goes to the shopping cart page. Okay, and so the most interesting bit will be the vbind class equal to active page equal to home. Can anyone tell me what I was trying to do there? Okay, so first we had vbind class equal to something. What does that do? Yeah, that's right. So essentially, it's binding the class property of this A element to something and assigned using Vue, and that will be something just behind here. So you could just assign to a fixed text string, and then we'll try to essentially give that element a particular class, as vbind class does. Okay, here the active is one of the class I want to assign to this link only if, that's the condition here, page, which is our proper, equal to home. So that what it means is this link will have the active class only if the page, the input parameter, equal to home. So basically that means if this is the current page, it will have the active class. Does that make some sense now? Yeah. And then it's the same for all the other links. Only difference will be the condition will be, say, when the active page becomes cart, then the second link would have the active class, not the other 2 links. And similarly for profile. And then in the CSS, I might define what I want my page or what the special link would look like. In this case, I changed the color to orange, so the text will become orange when it has the active class. You can do other formatting as you want. And then in the view, I need to link to the HTML elements, and then I will define the page. Again, this can be called some other names, doesn't matter. But the initial value is cart. That means, say, the default page will be cart, which is not ideal. And finally, in the actual div, which is app3, which links to this Vue instance, you use top link, which is the name of the components I defined. We then now bind again the page, which is this page here, which is the props for the property, to the page of the Vue instance. So now they are linked. And then after that, if you go to a different page, you just need to give it a different value, and that will change which link get highlighted. Does that make some sense? Yeah. I mean, it's even possible. Another way will be, let's say you add the last bit of div to different pages, and you can reuse the same component for different page. You just have to change the value here actually fixed. For example, for the home page, instead of using page, you can just give it the value, a text string as home, and then what you'll highlight is the home link for you, and other things. Okay, and this is not critical, but something I'm going to probably go through fairly quickly is you can use v4 together with Viewif, and the things is you need to remember the v4 has higher priority. So if you look at this example here, and so you first do v4, so iterate through an array called to-dos, And then you have a condition. It says, and if say to do dot is complete is not true, so that means and it will only display something if it's not completed, or the is completely is false. Okay, so what it does is it will iterate the item first, and for each items it will check whether this condition is not. So essentially this works like a filtering. It will filter out uh, all the to-dos which are completed. Okay, so another possible behavior which you might want to do is say you might want to decide whether you want to do the v-for at all, depends on the if condition. So say if there's something, if this is true, then you do v-for, and if this is false, you don't do v-for. Okay, so that's a slightly different behavior. And if you want to achieve that, you have to do something like this at the bottom. So you have to put v-for inside the Vf. And that's the only way to use Vf to control whether a v-for is going to be run or not. If you put them in the same line, the v-for will always run first. Okay, I'm going to skip this part. There's a little bit of details about whether the components get reused. Just don't have time to cover these. Have a look, will be useful. And finally, there's another one called VueShow, and which behaves very similarly to Viewif. And the main difference is the VueShow will render an element regardless of value. So for example, it doesn't matter whether the OK is true or false. If you use VueShow, the browser or the view will render this h1. But if OK is false, it will change the CSS to hidden element. So you will not see. And when it's changed to true, then it will show the element again. Whereas Viewif is slightly different. When the condition is false, Viewif will not even try to create that HTML element. It will only create one when the value becomes true. Does that make sense? So what happens is, the VueShow has a higher cost in terms of higher initial cost. In the sense, all the elements will be rendered, whether regardless of the true or false condition. That means the initial cost. If you have 100 elements, it will display all or render all 100 of them, even they are all hidden because of that. Whereas you use Viewif, these 100 elements, none of them will be rendered at all, so they'll be much faster. So that's but then later on, if you need to change the values, VueShow will be faster if it's already rendered, because it's just say switch where the element is visible or not. Whereas Viewif, you have to render the element later on if the value changes to true, because it's not rendered in the first time. Okay. Okay, so that's the first part, which is called the conditional rendering, essentially the Viewif, the else, etc. Okay, and then we move on to the second part, which is about events. Okay, and so we've seen this a few times already. So essentially, that's the VON directive. So that's the most important thing. We've seen this a few times already. And the click after that defines what events it responds to. So it could be click, could be other events, for example, mouse over, etc. And so this one is just save you from writing your own JavaScript and event handler, make it a bit faster. Okay, and does anyone know what this code example do? We've seen that before. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so what happens is every time user click this button, and the value of counter, which is a variable in data, will increase by 1. So that's what counter plus equal to 1 here. And then in the next line, the paragraph, this value going to get displayed. So every time user clicks the button, this number will increase by 1. Okay, if you find difficult to imagine, I think I have the example here. Okay, so that's the same implementation. If I click this one, you can see the numbers in the text changes every time I click. That's exactly what this code does. Sorry. That's exactly what this code does. Okay, and what shows here is, say, instead of writing the code directly in the element, here, essentially, this is the code that you want to do. Okay, but if you have more complex code, for example, something needs to require more than one line, etc., and you can do it with a function. So here, you can say v_onclick equal to greet, and greet itself is a function you defined in your Vue instance. So essentially, when you clicked this button, it will run the function, and you can have as many lines of code as there. So basically, you can do more complex behaviors. Yeah, that's okay. I think that's probably quite easy. Okay, and also you can even pass some parameters to your function as well. And so in here, you say v_onclick, and then you say, the response is say. Say is a function which you defined in your method, and you can pass in some parameters to that function as well. Then say this one will say hi, then it will alert message which say hi, and this is say what. Okay. So again, this part I do not have time to go into details, but essentially it what says you can, when you pass a parameter, or you can actually pass more than one parameter to the functions you want to call when it's run. So in this case, it wants to run the warn function, which is defined in your methods, but you can pass two parameters. One is defined, and the other one is a special parameter. Everything starts with a dollar in Vue is a special parameter. All it passes is the actual event happened in the browser. So basically, this is the thing which triggers the event. In this case, would be click, and it will pass the click object that the browser generated to the function, and the function can do something with it. So this is there because the default and click event handler, if you write in native JavaScript or plain JavaScript, you'll be able to do this. So this is just and allows you to do that. And maybe just very quickly, for example, once you received this event, the actual browser event object, and you can say event.prevent default. So that prevents the default behavior of something. Okay, and in this case, it is a button, and the default behavior of a button is to do submit. And if you then say event.prevent default, then if you click the button, it will not submit. And which actually is not an issue for Vue. For example, because you can probably get what user typed in already when user typed in, because you link that with your Vue model or something, and you don't want it to submit, which usually refresh the page, which will remove everything user typed. So this actually can be useful. Yeah. If you're interested, you can look a bit more later. Just today, don't have time to go into details. Okay, and there's a few other things you can say. You can say prevent, which we've seen before, but you can also do say stop, capture, self, etc. Again, we're going to just go through this. We're not going to go through this in more details. Have a look if you want to use this in your coursework. These are not actually required. Okay, and the next part is about key modifiers. And what it does is it allows you to replace some interaction. For example, click a button and use a key. So quite common, say, for these forms, and many of those, instead of click the submit button, you can just press enter as the word submit the thing for you. Usually it's easier. That means you can just type and press submit button. You don't have to switch to your mouse and then click the button. That's faster. So these are called key modifiers. So what it does here, it says v-on again. So that's where you do the event handling. And key up, so that's a particular event. So key up means when you release the key. But you have to press the key first before you can trigger v up. So it's the same. I'll use key up or key down. And you say dot enter. So this is the key modifier. So it means that if you press an enter key, that will be the same for, if the enter key is pressed and then released, it's the equivalent of doing submit, which is your button. Does that make sense? So, and this is the input field, and it will be associated with some other buttons called submit. When clicked or submit information user entered, and this one just says if the user entered submit, and it will press enter, it will submit the information in this form. Okay. Let me see if I get an example here. Let's see events. No, I didn't create that example. Yeah. And you can say other keys, for example, here, and that key becomes page down. And then that's what behavior would happen if you press the page down key when this input field is selected. And you can have, say, enter, which we've seen before. You can have tab key, delete key, escape key, or other keys. And you can say write the proper functions that will happen afterwards. Okay, and so you can even have system modifier keys. So these are things like Control Alt Shift, which you have to hold down and press another key. So you have hold down Shift and press Enter, and you can include that in your key specification as well. So it says, okay, for example, this one here, you can say I want to do click, but when I hold down the Control key, or you can say hold down Shift key and press a symbol or other key on the Shift, Enter, etc. And finally, the exact modifier. Okay, so the difference between this one, so this one, it says our response when I hold down Control and click on something. That's what it says. But what happens is, if at the same time you also hold down, say, Alt or Shift key, so it becomes Alt Shift Control, also Alt Shift click or Control Shift click, it will still work. Does that make sense? Whereas if you put exact there, it will only work if only Control is hold down. If you hold Control and Alt, it will not work. So that's the main difference. Okay, that's what the exact does. Okay, and you can decide whether it's left, right, or middle mouse buttons. Okay, so this is the event handling part. So, I guess this is, in a sense, for the coursework. For example, most of the event handlings in your coursework, I expect you to do that in Vue. rather than say using plain JavaScript. So I mean, it's probably easier as well. I mean, usually if you use Vue, you need to write less line of code and works easier. Okay. Okay. So maybe we're going to be on schedule. And so the last part is about form input and how can do that with Vue. And this is probably something you're going to use most in your coursework because, for example, when you register or even user typing search terms, you need to use some kind of forms. And there are lots of different JavaScript forms, and Vue support most of them. Okay, we start with a very simple one. This is actually one we used before. The main thing here is the V model. If you remember, it provides two-way bindings in the sense, and if the value changed in the JavaScript code, then it will change on the page. And other way, say if a user enters something to change the value on the page, and then it will reflect in the code as well. That's the two-way binding. So anyone knows what this example does? This again is something actually we covered in the first lecture on Vue. Anyone can figure out what this one does? Yeah? Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So you have an input field, and it's linked to the message variable, which is this one in your Vue. That means these two are binded. So whatever you typed in here, it will change this value, and if you change the value in the code, it will reflect here. Actually, it's get typed displayed here. So I think I should have this one. Okay, so this is slightly different, but basically as I've typed in, so that's my input field, and this is the template. And then when I'm changing here, the text will change here. I assume if I say, let me check, what did I call this? Forms. Oh, I didn't have a name for this, so it will not be able to change in the console. Okay, so that's the general idea. So we just look at a few different forms you can use in. Okay, can you think of the type of the forms that you have in HTML? So obviously the simplest one is just a text field, but do you remember any other types of forms or selections you can have in HTML? Yeah? Sorry? Okay, text area. So that's where you have a bigger part. You can type in more than one line, essentially. Any other ones? Yeah, you can have drop-down menu. You can have radio buttons. Sometimes you allow you to select multiple options instead of just one. Okay, so that's what we're gonna have a look. So these different options and how do you bind it with Vue? Or how do you make those a little bit easier to use? Okay, and so in terms of just a single text field, which is we already seen before. So there's one line, you can type in the message, it will bind to the Vue code. And it's the same for the text area. And so the text area, actually the HTML element is not input type equal to text area, just separate ones. And you can bind that to your Vue variable called the message, and this can be displayed here. Let me see if I have this example here. Okay, so it does run in the browser as well. So this is my text area, and usually Chrome would allows you to okay. So the only thing I want to mention is here. For example, if I leave some space and in my text area, these spaces get replicated in the display here as well. Okay, so this is, anyone knows how do we achieve this? Because normally if you just say save this as a text string, and it will ignore all the space in between the text. So this is achieved with this pre-line. Basically that is this part, and it will give you, say, any empty space or line breaks. If you type in the message, it will be kept there as well. That's what that does. Okay, and so the next one is checkbox. So these are the okay, these are the little things. You can have a box in front. For example, this one, that's called a checkbox. Keep doing that. And so you can say, so the input type equal to checkbox will give you that little box in front of something. It can have an ID, and you can have a V model called checked. That means you're going to link that to the checked property in your Vue instance. And as a checkbox, it only has two values, either true or false. Basically, that's indicating whether the box is ticked or not. And then, for example, once you do that, and you can display the values, the checked, that's your Vue variable, and you can just display like this, just to see if it's working. But actually, in your code, you probably don't want to actually display it, but you will say once it's checked or not checked, you will do something in your JavaScript code. So if you look at this example here, yeah. So we defined a checkbox exactly as we did in the example, and we'll display the results. And in terms of script, again, it's very simple. All it does is just say, I have a variable defined called checked. Its initial value is false. That's all. And when you run this in the browser, so you would see here, and that's what this false display is. If you click, it will change to true, and if you click again, it changes to false. So basically, that's the value you get when you vbind, and use vmodel to bind to a checkbox. So that's the value it's going to get back. Control 2. No. Okay, and the next one is slightly more complicated ones. Is you might have multiple checkbox. So all of these are checkbox. So you can see that's the first one, that's the second, and we have a third one. So these looks like these here. And you can bind all of these to the same variable in your Vue instance called check the names. So as a result, essentially it will give you an array with 3 values. Then it will record for each of these checkbox whether it's checked or not. So in this here, we again just to display whatever the values you get back from the Vue. So you can see currently nothing is selected, so it's an empty array. And if you pick first one, it will including 1, including 2, including 3. And you can untick any of these, and this will change. Yeah. So slightly more complicated version than this. For this one, you only get true or false. This one you can get more than one value at the same time. Also, say when you click a button or select a checkbox, the value you get returned here is defined by the value of the value property of the checkbox. Because here it says Jack, John, and Mike, and that's why you get Jack, John, and Mike in here. But for example, if I change those in the code, I change this to say 1, 2, and 3. And hopefully if I click here, it will give you 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, you can define whatever you want. You can match it to the labels, but it can be something else as well. Oop. Okay, and so the next form or list is the radio button. And so the main difference is, and in the radio button, you can only pick one at a time. So the checkbox, if you have 3, you can pick all 3. But for radio button, you can only pick one. And it works very similarly. Once you pick something, and the values will be shown, you can get the return from the options you picked. Again, and what you get returned is defined by the value property, and the binding part is exactly the same. Okay, the next one is called the select element. So that's how you create a drop-down list in HTML. So that's the select element. And then how many options in there you define yourself. So in this case, we defined 3 options. And again, you bind whatever you selected to a variable or view variable called selected, which is defined here. Then it will be able to get your selected options. So basically, if I selected A, you get A here. You select B, you get B here, and etc. Okay. So there's no view, so no value property here. So it's basically whatever the text is for each option, that's what you get. Okay, and then some of these array lists, sorry, these drop-down lists actually supports multiple selections. So you have to hold down. On Mac, it will be Command key, and on Windows will be Control key, or sometimes even Shift key, which allows you to multiple selections. Okay, so that's just still the same. Select. You have to put multiple here, and in terms of binding and what you back is get back from Vue is exactly the same, except now it can have more than one value. Previously, you can only do one. Yeah. Okay. And so this is maybe more closer to what you need in the coursework. And in the coursework, you need to provide in the filter on the side for user to select. So the filter itself can be, for example, a multiple selection box, or a drop down. It's up to you, or maybe a radio button. That's all up to you how you design it. But the values of these options need to be populated dynamically. So for example, if on the side you have a box user allows to select different topics, then the value of these subjects, let's say math, English, or music, needs to be populated dynamically based on whatever is in the data. Okay, that makes it slightly harder because in this case we hard code what the options are here and how many of these are. I mean, these can be done fairly easily by just using a Vue for. So as we seen before, so this is a select box. And if you just do through, let's say the options, okay, the options is your array here. which can be, for example, just a list of the course we gave you, for example, 10. Or maybe this will be a better one. For example, you already filtered down based on certain location. Doesn't matter, so long as it's an array. And then for each of these options, basically each of these elements in your array, you can create one option for your selection box. Then this way you can dynamically generate, changing in terms of number of options and say what these options are dynamically. Does that make sense? No? Yes. Okay, if we look at these examples, what does it run is it will generate a number of these option objects as a result of this v-for. Yeah, that makes sense. So you run the v-for, you repeat the same thing a few times, and each time it will pick one option and out of the options. Okay, so the options is this one here. So that means each time you'll either get this line, the first time you get this line, the second time you get this line, and the third time you get that line, etc. Right? Does that make sense? And then once you get an element, you just create an option. It will be saying is equal to option.text. So that will be 1, 2, or 3. That's all it is. If we look at the previous example, you can see whatever in between the option tag is a text you displayed on the page and also the value returned when you select it. And in this case, that just means the 1, 2, and 3 will be the text displayed in the option box, which is actually this one here. You will see 1, 2, and 3 here. And if you change the array, and this list will automatically update. So if we go to the actual code, let me see, that's the radio, that's ABC. I'm sure I had before. Okay, so that's this example here. And this example from here to here is exactly the same as we see in the slides. The options currently have 3. And that's why we see 3 options here. But for example, if I update here, add another one, say this time I text into new option and the value, okay, 4. Okay, and I now save this. And then if we go to the actual example, and you can see we now have new options. And if you select that, it gives you the selected values 4. Did that make a bit more sense now? Hopefully, yeah. The other details is this part. And so you can set the values for the options as well. So here, for each option, it doesn't set value, so it just returns the text. But if you want, and you can set the value property to something as well. In this case, it's binds to option.value, which is the A, B, and C. So that's what we get returned. But if you don't do that, it will just return you 1, 2, 3, or new option, or anything else. Okay, so this is probably you're going to use for your filter in your coursework. You want to generate an array that the user can filter it on. For example, this array could just be a list of all the unique subjects you have in your collection. And then you can use this, you can create a filter, user can select. And once user select one of the subject, then you can use that value to filter your display in the search area. Yeah? Yeah. Okay, so the question is, how do you remove duplicates from this list? Okay, so you can write your own code. Essentially, every time you want to add new items to the list, you can check if that already exists. If it already, and you just ignore, don't add it to. That's all. And I'll also show you a slightly shorter examples later on, but it requires you something called a set in JavaScript. Okay, and so that's that. Yeah, and so this one it says you can use viewbind to change the values, which is already seen in the previous example here. We're already using the vbind to change the values for return the values for each options. So I think we can select this part. Okay, and these are some minor details. I'm not gonna go into have a look, and if you are interested. Okay, and then can also adding the type, sorry, these kind of postfix and something to enforce the type of the return. So if you say vmodel, we all know vmodel is to bind some kind of form or user input to a view variable, and by default it will be a string, and if you know it's definitely a number, you can force it, say it's a dot number, or alternatively you can do this conversion in your JavaScript code. You can say convert that to a number, or you can do dot trim, which will remove any space or line breaks from the input if there's any. Okay, yeah, so this is probably the more interesting part. Say, so we are looking at an example of the sign up forms, and then how do we use these like a form binding for the view to do that? And so this is the actual form. So there isn't anything too special about it. So you have the form elements, which kind of like the container, including everything for this form. And you had h1, so that's just some text. And you had a label, so again that's a text, but it's important in terms that it's now says for email. Does anyone knows what's that? What this for property does, and what does this for email can be used for, or why do you need that? No. Okay, so what this does is actually telling the browser which this label is for. Okay, so what it says, this label is for something with an ID called email, which is this one here. Does that? Okay, that's all it does. So you could just put it as a text, for example, a paragraph is, or a spam says email, and followed by an input field. It visually would look very similar, but the browser would not understand there's a connection between this label or this span and the input behind it. Let me see if it actually. Okay, let me change to the other example code. Okay, so for example, if you look at this form, and now what happens, because I did this label for email in my code, so the browser understands this text or this label is for this text field, and if I click on this one, it will select the text for me. For example, if this is a checkbox, it will select that checkbox by just clicking on the label itself. And if you don't have this for email part, that will not work. So I can take out the for email part, for example, and then it will just be a label. And if you click on that, nothing happens. You can see I'm collecting this. I'm selecting that, nothing happens because it doesn't understand these two are linked. And while this one I still have, if I click it will select on the next one. Okay, and then so that's input field, and it's required. Anyone remembers required for your form? That means compulsory. You have to. If you leave empty, the HTML will complain. Type equal to email. Anyone remembers again from last year? Maybe a bit long. What does that do? Yeah. Yes, yes. That's right. So this is again, so it's do the validation for you. You don't have to write any code. So HTML5 will run some checks on the user typing to say and to check to make sure it's an email address. For example, if you're just typing some numbers, it'll tell you that's not email. You have, but yeah. Okay, and then ID equal to email, so just ID. This is used for the for here, and finally V model email. So that just link to the email in your Vue instance. Okay, that's what it does. Then I create a couple of lines just to separate these, and then I had a password field. It's the same, just say had a password as well. It's required, and the type will be password. So that just basically means everything you type in, it will not display, just show some stars. So if I type in something, it will look like this. And it binds to the password variable in your Vue instance. Okay. And finally, you have a button. And I said when I click on the button, I want to run the function called onSubmit. Again, so that's my function here. So currently we don't have anything yet. So all we did so far is we set up the form. So it has, say, a heading, and then the email and password field, and submit button. And when user clicks submit, it will do something. But currently, don't do anything yet. Okay. So the checking is already there. Okay, and I can submit, but currently it doesn't really do it. Actually, it already does something. But if we look at the code so far, it doesn't really do much yet. But this is how it would set up your forms and how that link to your Vue instance. Right. And in terms of linking to Vue instance is actually very easy. Just link to the two variables you're going to use and the functions you're going to call when the button is clicked. Okay, and so the now is the extending of the submit, actually the submit function. So that's this part here, which was empty before. Now we can add something in. So what I add in here is just to say, and that actually would first check if email existed or not before register user. And if it's correct or if it doesn't exist, then we just add the new user to the local storage. And do you still remember? Okay. And if you don't remember local storage, you have to look at last year's lecture, or just Google it. It's very straightforward. And then if we look at this code quickly, so I define something called the users, and another thing called new email that equal to this.email. If you remember, that is binded here. That's a variable from the Vue instance, which is binded to the this input field when we said Vue model email. Okay, and I then say local storage dot get items users. Okay, so essentially the local storage is the key value storage. So that means I want to get something called with the key is called users. in this state and in this instance or example, I expect users to be an array. So that's an array contains information about all the users. So each element will be a email and password pair. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's the simplest one. You might add more information about users too. Okay, and you have to do JSON dot pass. Okay. Okay. So first, this is used as a condition. So what it does says, just to check if there's any user exists, or does this user's property or object exist in local storage. It might not be, because the first time when you run, it will be completely empty. So when this one, you didn't get any return or get empty return, then the next line will not run, because it's empty, nothing will run. If this is true, then you do JSON.pass. Anyone remember what that does? Not really. No. Well, okay. You need really to, okay, brush up a little bit. Secondly, so what you get from the local storage is a text string, which in fact is a stringified JSON object, if you remember that thing. So this is essentially the JSON.pass is to turn a string into a JSON object. So it will say, then the JavaScript will understand that's a JSON object, not just a string. So if anyone remembers what is the opposite of JSON pass? Yeah, JSON stringify, which I think I'm gonna use later on. So this is something you have to do before you're saving a JSON object to local storage. Later on, when you say save to MongoDB, you have to do the same thing. Okay, so what I've done so far is I retrieved the user array from local storage. I pass it and make it into a JSON array, not just string now, and then I stored in users so I can access locally. Okay, and then I say if users. Okay, anyone knows why I need this? So this users is this user here, which I try to store the list of the users I already have. Anyone knows why I do it here? That's right. So essentially, again, when you first started, there wouldn't be any users. So you would have empty users. So you don't need to do any of these. This is only apply if you already have something stored in your user list. So you can see the else will be, say, you just create an array called users, and it only has the new email and password user just entered, and you put that into local storage using local storage set items and the users, and then actually that's the JSON array. Yeah. So that basically means if there's no user, just do this. We create a new array with only one element and put that into local storage. Okay, so this is the part where you actually only have one user. Okay, and then this is the tricky part, this line. So I didn't format, I put a few things in one line just so I can show everything in one slide. So first, users is just a JSON array, so we all know that, that's okay. Then is dot sum. Okay, So what I'm trying to do here is just to check if the email address already exists. That's all I do. So as we said before, you can do this manually. You can just do a loop and return every element in the array and then check the email address and see if it's the same. Then that's you can do. And I mean, it's not that long, maybe 3-4 lines of code. That's all it is. Okay, so this is a slightly shorter way. So the array has a function called the sum, which does exactly that. So if the condition below it, the condition or the function behind it returns true, and it will become true, and it will say there is something existed. That's all it does. What the sum function is. And if you remember last week we talked about or maybe this week we talked about the array has this filter function which takes a function as an input and decides which gets keeps in the filter results and which not get kept. So that's the same thing. So you need to define the function which returns either true or false, and so long as one of these becomes true, and this sum function will return true. So once this is true, you will say email already exists, and you return. Return means I stop the function. I don't do anything anymore. But you probably want to do a little bit more than this, and just alert the message. Maybe you will prompt the user, say email already exists, and ask the user to enter a new email address, or just check. Okay, so this function, all it does is it takes a parameter called users, and it's just return user.email. So that means this is going through the user list, take one user at a time, and then check user.email the value if that equals to new email, which is the email's user entered. That's all it does. Okay, it's a slightly faster way to. If any of these true, and this condition user.sum will be true, and these will be triggered. Okay, and if none of these is true, so basically don't return. Return just basically means stop running of the function. It just stopped here, and it will say user.push. Anyone remembers what the push does? Yeah, okay. So that's the array function. So it adds one thing to the end of the array. That's probably the one you use the most. And you can see I'm adding one JSON object. And it has one property called email, the other property called password. And the value of these are these email and password user entered. That's all. And this get added to the end of the users and users array, which is what is currently. So now it's increased by 1. And then you say local storage.set item and users json.stringify users. Okay, so first you need to stringify the user array before you can save it to local storage, and you do this by json.stringify. And essentially what you're doing here is you basically rewrite the value for the user's property in the local storage with the now updated user array with one additional users. That's all it does. Okay. And I explained this part already. That basically means when you don't have any users stored at all, then you just create an array with one user and add that to your local storage. Okay, is that, yeah? Okay, we're still running out of time. We still have another example, but this is part where you can use. So it shows you the first part where shows you, okay, how do you link your view to the forms, and this part, how do you check whether it exists, email, and then saved or retrieved from the local storage. Once you can do this, say the sign in will be quite similar. Yeah. Okay, we're going to use whatever time we have left. Just have a look at the filtering and searching part. Okay, how everything is going to work together for this part. So that's the same array of 10 courses we use in the lab. Okay. So in this case, we're going to create a select element, use that to select use that for filtering purpose. And then you need a select with a number of options inside. As we said, we want to generate these options dynamically. So this part is actually very similar to the example we've seen before already. So the options is actually generated by everything inside the topics, which is an array we're going to have to compute from the data. Okay, so if we look at the actual array itself, so in the topics, we just want math, English, and piano. That's all we need to for the topics. That can be used for the filtering. Maybe just first quickly, so that should generate something looks like this. And if you select, it should. Does this support multiple selection? Yeah, it supports multiple selection as well. Where were we? Okay. So this part, it will go through the topics array, and for each element in the topics array, it will create an option element, and that becomes a option in the list that you can select. Yeah, that part is okay. So the next part is, how do you get this topics array out of the data you have, which is this? Obviously, you can just write code as we check, say, the duplicate email address before. You go through each of the items, and then you get the topic value for each of these elements and add them to a new array, which you will be returned. And when you add, you just first check if that already exists or not. So slightly more lines of code, but that's a general idea that you can write. Nothing too difficult. Okay. Yeah. So okay, and also here we bind that to, say, selected topics. So this is this property here, and that will basically save the values of the user from the interface, and you can use that, say, to update your search results. Okay, do we have time? Where is the filtered cost? Where did I do selected locations? Okay, I'll just explain this. Okay, but this part is to basically display the search results. So basically something like this. So this is already after you do the filtering on your search result. So you have to create a filter first, user do a selection, and based on user selection, you filter the entire data set to the ones. User selected, in this case, for example, they filtered by subject, so that should only have mass, and then you can display here. And this is when it's important to use this view for, we mentioned in the lab this week, where it automatically goes through the values and properties. You don't need to know where they are, what they are. And okay, yeah, I think we have to stop here. But the code is there, so obviously you can see this is the function that's used to compute the filtered collection. So basically reduce the entire early collections. You have a class here, or yeah. Okay. Yeah, coming. We're finishing now. Yeah. So just have a look at the code. The code will be on the module page, which is part of the lecture slides, so it will be there. Yeah. Okay. But so